The auction square was loud with the shuffle of boots and the clink of coins, yet I heard none of it once the steward's hand tightened on my shoulder and forced me to kneel. A silk scarf, soft as breath, was pressed into my palm, and I understood without words that it was to blindfold me. "You will serve her unseen," the steward muttered, "for no man is allowed to look at the princess." I had been raised on ranch dust and open sky, a boy who once dreamed of horses and sunlight. Yet here I was, traded for my uncle's debts like cattle, dragged into a world of walls and whispers. The crowd hushed as the royal litter approached, its curtains heavy with embroidery, its bearers moving with careful reverence. They said the princess was cursed, that to meet her eyes was to invite ruin, and so the nobles averted their gazes while craning their necks for a glimpse. When the litter stopped before me, I could feel the air change, thick with both awe and fear. The steward yanked the scarf over my eyes, knotting it too tight, leaving me blind in the daylight. I heard her then, the faint rustle of silks, the intake of breath that sounded less like majesty and more like loneliness. "He is strong enough," one guard announced, and there was laughter. Mocking me as nothing more than property, as though strength was all that made me worth keeping alive. I wanted to shout, to reclaim my name, but pride was dangerous here. Instead, I swallowed hard and stayed still. Then a softer voice cut through, unlike any command I had ever heard. "What is your name?" she asked, her tone as fragile as glass. No one had prepared me for that. No one had said she might speak, much less to me. The steward hissed at me to remain silent, to remember the law, yet the question lingered like fire in the air. My lips trembled, but I said nothing, though my whole chest ached to answer. The scarf over my eyes pressed darkness into my skull, but I could feel her presence lean closer, a warmth, a curiosity. Then, so low only I could hear, she whispered words that twisted the world. "Lift your eyes just once." My heart staggered inside me. In that single moment, I knew this was no curse, no myth, but a woman pleading not to be invisible. The blindfold burned against my skin, though it was only cloth, because her words had set fire inside me, hotter than any sun I'd worked beneath on the ranch. "Lift your eyes, just once." The guards stood close, boots scraping stone, and the steward's warning hiss rattled like a snake, but her whisper echoed louder than all of them. I wanted to obey, yet fear twisted my gut. What if the rumors were true? What if looking at her meant losing everything, even my life? I clenched my fists, knuckles white, and kept my head bowed, but inside, I was breaking. They led me stumbling through the crowd, blindfold still on, until I felt the cool shade of stone arches and the heavy silence of the palace close around me. The air changed again. Gone was the smell of dust and sweat, replaced by incense and roses, cloying, foreign, almost suffocating. I was pushed to my knees before a vast chamber. Chains rattled nearby, though not for me, and I realized this place was not merely a home, but a cage of rules. When the guards left us alone, the silence stretched until it trembled. Then I heard it again, her footsteps, soft on the marble, drawing near. My chest rose and fell too fast, like I was running though my body hadn't moved. "You may speak now," she said, her voice trembling like someone who had never been given the right to command. I swallowed and gave her my name. The sound of it seemed to startle her, as though no man had ever dared to answer her directly. She repeated it quietly, like she was trying the shape of me in her mouth, and something inside me steadied. I wanted to tell her I wasn't afraid of curses, but my courage snagged on the silence. Then, in a rush, she blurted what no princess should have said. "I was never asked if I wanted this life." My pulse hammered. In the darkness of my blindfold, I saw her loneliness clearer than any face. A princess hidden from the world, forbidden even to be looked at, her beauty turned into chains tighter than mine. My throat closed, but words scraped through. "Then let me be the first to see you," I said, though it was barely more than a breath. She gasped, as if the marble beneath us had cracked. For a heartbeat, I thought she would scream or summon guards. Instead, I felt the cloth loosen. A hand, small, trembling, untangling the knot at the back of my head. The blindfold slid free, and the darkness I'd carried shattered. Light hit me hard, but it wasn't the sun that blinded me, it was her. The world sharpened all at once as the cloth fell, and I sucked in air as though I had been drowning. At first, it was the sheer flood of light through jeweled windows, scattering colors across stone walls. But then it was her. She stood so close I could see the tremor in her hands as she held the discarded blindfold, fingers clutching it like a guilty secret. The whispers in the town had never said the truth. They had spoken of a cursed princess, too dangerous to be seen, whose beauty was said to drive men to madness. Yet the face before me was not a curse. It was the loneliest truth I had ever looked upon. Her eyes, dark and alive with storms she'd never been allowed to release, caught mine, and for a moment neither of us moved. My breath staggered, but I refused to look away, though terror gnawed at my spine, because this was no curse. This was a woman begging to be seen, to be more than the hush of her title. She shivered as though each second of eye contact tore another rule from her skin. "No one," she whispered, voice breaking. "No one has ever dared." Her lips trembled, and she dropped her gaze, as though ashamed of the very gift she had just given me. I wanted to tell her she had nothing to fear, but the words died in my throat because the chamber doors slammed wide and 3 guards strode in. My body seized, heart galloping, but she lifted her chin, all trace of trembling gone, and barked an order sharp enough to cut stone. "Leave us." The guards froze, confusion rippling between them. It was clear they had never heard her voice raised with such command. Still they bowed, suspicion simmering, and backed away, though I knew their ears clung to the silence just beyond the doors. My knees ached on the cold floor, but I did not rise. I could not. I had already broken the law by looking at her, and still my eyes would not let go. She saw it, saw the way I couldn't stop staring, and a flush lit her cheeks, fragile but fierce. Then, in the faintest whisper, she asked what no royal should have ever confessed. "Do you think I am cursed?" The question hollowed me out, because I understood then, the curse wasn't hers. It was the lie the world had tied around her throat to keep her hidden. I shook my head slowly, my voice scraping free. "You're not cursed. You're human." For the first time, her lips parted in something close to a smile, though sorrow draped it like a veil. She leaned closer, her shadow falling over me, and whispered so only I could hear, "Then keep seeing me, before they take you away." The echo of her words rattled through my chest long after she pulled away. "Keep seeing me, before they take you away." It was not just a plea. It was a warning. The silence in the chamber thickened, broken only by the faint hiss of torches lining the walls. I felt the weight of unseen eyes even though the guards had gone. Somewhere beyond the carved doors, whispers would already be traveling down the stone corridors. I had looked at what no man was allowed to look at, and soon someone would demand a price for that disobedience. The princess, however, didn't flinch. She turned from me and drifted toward the tall, arched windows. The blindfold clutched like a dying bird in her hand. She raised her face toward the slice of sky framed by colored glass, and I realized she was breathing as though for the first time. All my life, she said softly. "I have been told that my face would ruin kingdoms, that my eyes would bring ruin to the men who dared meet them. So they hid me in shadows. They taught me shame in every reflection. Do you know what it is to live unseen?" I swallowed hard. "I do now," I said, my voice low but steady. She glanced over her shoulder, surprise flickering in her eyes, and I saw the smallest crack in the fortress of her loneliness. But then, her jaw hardened. "You will be punished for this," she whispered, as though testing how much truth her lips could bear. Before I could answer, a rustle outside the door grew louder. Angry voices, booted feet. My stomach twisted. They were coming back. She spun, clutching my arm, and for a moment I felt the tremor of her pulse against my wrist. "Promise me," she said, eyes flashing. "Promise me you won't look away, no matter what they say or what they threaten to do." I hesitated, fear clawing up my ribs, but I nodded. "I promise." The doors slammed open. 5 men stormed in, 3 guards, a priest in white robes, and a tall figure cloaked in black with a silver seal on his chest. Authority radiated from him, cold and sharp. His gaze fell on me kneeling at the princess's feet, and his lip curled in disgust. "So it's true," he sneered. "The outlaw dares break the sacred decree." The princess stepped forward, chin high, her voice trembling but loud. "He has done nothing wrong. I let him see me." The word sent a chill down the hall, as though the stone itself had gasped. The cloaked man's eyes narrowed, rage burning. "Then you have cursed us both," he spat, before lifting his hand in signal. Steel flashed as the guards drew their blades, and for the first time, I felt the weight of her secret pressing down not just on her shoulders, but on mine. The guards surged forward like wolves loosed from chains, their blades glinting in the torchlight, but the princess lifted her hand sharply, halting them mid-step. Her eyes locked on the cloaked man's face, steady and unflinching. "Enough," she said, her voice ringing against the stone walls. For the first time, I heard command in her tone. Not the timid whisper of a hidden girl, but the voice of someone born to rule. The cloaked man stiffened, but did not lower his hand. "You dare break the vow your father swore?" he snarled, spittle shining on his lip. "The veil was your covenant with the gods. You show your face, and kingdoms fall." The princess inhaled slowly, and I realized she was trembling, not with fear, but with fury. "It wasn't my father's vow," she said, lifting the blindfold high into the air. "It was yours. You have kept me prisoner to guard your power, and now the first man who has ever seen me with eyes unclouded calls me human, not curse." She turned to me, and in that moment I realized what the cloaked figure feared most. Not her beauty, not her eyes, but the possibility that she might be loved. "You don't understand," the cloaked man hissed, his voice low and venomous. "If she belongs to you, she no longer belongs to us. Do you know what you've taken, outlaw?" I stared at him, heat rising in my blood. "I didn't take anything," I said. "She gave me what you never could. Truth." His hand snapped down like a blade itself. The guards lunged again, steel scraping from scabbards. The princess cried out, but before they reached me, something unexpected happened. A horn sounded in the distance, deep, mournful, echoing through the halls. The guards froze mid-stride, their faces paling. The cloaked man's eyes widened in disbelief. "No," he breathed. The princess straightened, gripping my sleeve tightly. "What is it?" I whispered. She turned her face towards the sound, and for the first time I saw something like hope stir in her eyes. "That horn is only blown when the people gather outside the palace gates," she said softly. "If they've come, they must have heard." The cloaked man's face twisted with rage, his authority suddenly shaken. He shoved the priest aside and bellowed at the guards. "Seal the gates! Do not let them near her!" But the horn blew again, closer now, joined by the rising murmur of many voices carried on the wind. The princess leaned closer to me, her breath trembling at my ear. "They've never dared come for me before," she whispered. "Now they will see what you have seen." The horn's call did not fade. It multiplied. By the time the echo of the second blast had settled, the sound of voices rose outside the stone walls, dozens turning to hundreds. The murmur carried like a tide, swelling with words I could not yet catch. The princess's hand tightened around mine, her knuckles white. "They know," she whispered, almost to herself. The cloaked man's face twisted, a mask of fury that cracked beneath fear. "Keep her hidden," he roared, though the guards hesitated now, their eyes shifting uneasily toward the noise that grew beyond the gates. For years they had obeyed, but fear of the people was not so easily silenced. I leaned closer to the princess, whispering quickly, "Do you want them to see you?" Her eyes, brighter than fire in that moment, did not leave the heavy doors. "All my life I have been unseen. Tonight, let me be known." Before the cloaked man could stop us, she pulled me towards the hall's archway that led outside. The guards stepped forward, but hesitated again as the pounding began. First fists, then sticks, then the butts of tools and spears. The gates shook on their hinges. A chant rose through the clamor. Her name. They were calling her name. She froze mid-step, eyes wide, as if the very sound of it on their lips was a miracle. "They remember me," she breathed. The cloaked man spat, his hand rising as though to strike her, but I stepped between them, my chest tight with rage. "Touch her, and I'll tear the cloak from your head," I growled, surprising even myself with the rawness in my voice. For a heartbeat, silence hung. Then the gates burst open. Lanterns bobbed in the night, a sea of villagers, farmers, and children pouring into the courtyard. They carried torches, bread loaves, branches, and broken tools, symbols of both defiance and offering. At their front, an old woman lifted her voice. "We have come for the daughter you hid from us," she cried, her voice rough as gravel. The crowd echoed her, surging forward until the guards' line faltered. The princess's breath caught in her throat. Her veil, still clutched in her hand, fluttered like a pale ghost in the torchlight. She turned to me. "If I step forward, they will never let me step back," she whispered. My chest burned as I looked at her. This woman who had lived unseen, who had asked me to look upon her first. "Then step," I whispered back, "and I'll step beside you." She drew a shuddering breath, dropped the blindfold to the stones, and walked forward. The crowd hushed as one, their torches lowering like bowing heads. And for the first time in her life, they looked at her. The hush of the crowd was fragile, like thin glass waiting to shatter, and the cloaked man struck it with his voice. He strode forward, his black robes cutting against the torchlight, his arm raised as though he held judgment itself. "Do not be fooled," he thundered, his voice echoing off the stone. "She is no princess. She is the curse that brought famine to your fields, the storm that ruined your harvests, the reason your children were born sickly." His words slithered through the air like smoke, coiling into old fears the people had been taught to believe. Faces shifted uneasily, eyes darting between her unveiled face and his accusing finger. The princess stood still, though her hands trembled at her sides. I felt the weight of the moment press against her, threatening to drag her back into the shadows. I stepped closer, speaking low, meant only for her ears. "He speaks lies, but they believe lies because no truth has ever been shown. Show them." Her lips parted as though she could not breathe, but then her gaze swept the crowd. She lifted her chin, the veil falling fully from her hands. "You were told I was a curse," she called, her voice thin but steady. "But tell me, was it I who burned your homes? Did these hands whip the backs of your children? Did this face spill blood in your streets? Or were those done by the ones who told you I was to blame?" Murmurs broke through the crowd, uneasy but growing, as if the question had never been spoken aloud before. The cloaked man snarled, his voice rising like a whip. "Do not listen. Her beauty is a trap, her eyes a spell. Avert your gaze or she will bind you to ruin." But even as he barked, I saw heads turning, eyes locking on her, seeing her truly for the first time. And the longer they looked, the softer their fear became, replaced by something more dangerous to his power. Hope. A child's voice cut through the muttering, small and high and unafraid. "She looks like Mama," a little girl whispered, clutching her father's hand. The words spread faster than the cloaked man's shouts ever could. The father bent, lifted the girl high on his shoulders, and let her stare openly. "Then let her be seen," he said firmly. The crowd roared, the sound rolling like thunder, louder than the cloaked man's denials. He spun toward the guards. "Stop them! Blindfold her!" But the men hesitated, their swords hanging slack, torn between command and conscience. The princess reached for my hand, her grip no longer trembling. "They're choosing," she whispered, voice raw. And I knew if the people's choice held, the lie that had bound her for years would snap like twine in a storm. The air burned with the sound of voices breaking free, 1,000 throats shouting as if chains had cracked all at once. The princess stood taller, her hand still clutching mine, her face glowing with the kind of strength no command could silence. For a heartbeat, the cloaked man seemed cornered, his dark robes shifting like a shadow with nowhere left to cling. Then he smiled, a twisted, venomous curl of lips that chilled me more than his rage ever had. From beneath his cloak he drew not a sword, but a small golden vial, its glass etched with markings I did not recognize. He held it high for the crowd to see. "You think she is freedom? You think she is hope?" he shouted, his voice riding above the thunder of the people. "Then watch what she brings." He uncorked the vial and flung the contents into the fire pit that burned at the center of the square. The flames surged green, spitting sparks into the sky, and a foul smoke curled outward, thick and choking. Panic struck like a hammer. Men clutched their children, women covered their mouths, and the shouts turned into coughs and cries of terror. The cloaked man pointed at her, his voice triumphant. "See, her presence poisons the very air. Look how the fire bows to her curse." The crowd staggered, fear clawing its way back in, threatening to undo everything she had dared to show them. I pulled her close, shielding her with my body as the acrid smoke swirled around us. "It's a trick," I growled, forcing my voice steady, praying the people could hear me. "A trick of his hand, not hers." But doubt flickered again in their eyes, old wounds reopening in their minds. The cloaked man stepped forward, raising his arms like a prophet of doom. "Bow to me, or choke on her curse. I am the shield that stands between you and her ruin." He spread his cloak wide, and from its folds spilled soldiers, men in black armor who had hidden until now. Swords flashed as they circled the crowd, forcing them back into silence with the hiss of steel. My heart pounded, rage boiling, but the princess's voice cut through my fury. "Let me speak," she whispered, her hand tightening around mine. "If I do not, his lie will root again." She stepped forward, even as the smoke coiled around her veil and the soldiers closed in, and raised her voice. "No curse lives in me," she cried, louder than the crackle of the fire, "but one lives in the hearts of those who profit by fear." Her words struck like a stone in a pond, ripples pushing outward. A few villagers straightened, fists clenched. eyes turning on the cloaked man instead of her. He saw it, and his smile faltered for the first time. The battle for belief was not over, but the tide was shifting again. Dangerously, desperately, and the night was far from done. The crowd stood caught between two tides, fear pressing them back, courage pulling them forward. The soldiers moved like wolves, blades glinting under the green fire, circling as if the people were already their prey. The cloaked man raised his hand again, and the smoke swelled, hissing with a sound that felt alive. "Bow," he commanded, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the chaos. "Bow to me, and I will spare you from her curse." But something shifted in the air, something he had not accounted for. An old man near the front, his back bent with years, threw down his walking stick into the fire. "I bow to no fear," he shouted, coughing through the smoke. A woman followed, stepping forward to cover her child's eyes, daring to look at the princess instead of the cloaked man. Then another, and another. Small sparks of defiance, but together they made the smoke falter. The cloaked man saw it, panic creeping into his face. He grabbed one of his soldiers by the arm and dragged him into the firelight. "Strike her!" he screamed. "End this illusion of hope before it spreads!" The soldier hesitated, sweat beading beneath his helmet, his sword trembling as he looked at the princess. Her veil lifted slightly in the breeze, and for the first time, even her enemies seemed to waver at the sight of her calm, unflinching eyes. She raised her hand, not to stop him, but to offer it. "You were taught to fear me," she said softly, her voice carrying through the stillness. "But I am only a woman, like the mothers who raised you, like the daughters you protect. Do not let him blind you with lies." The soldier's sword fell, not toward her but to the ground, ringing loud in the silence. Gasps rippled across the square. The cloaked man roared in fury and shoved the soldier aside, lifting his golden vial again. "Then choke with her!" he bellowed, hurling the last of the liquid into the fire. The flames howled, flaring so high they painted the whole sky green. But this time, instead of spreading fear, the blaze bent back upon him. The smoke twisted, curling inward, wrapping around his cloak as if his own poison had turned traitor. He staggered, clawing at the air, his mask slipping to reveal eyes wild with terror. The villagers watched, torn between awe and dread, as the man who had ruled their fears for years choked on his own creation. Still, his grip wasn't yet broken. His soldiers tightened the circle, and though the crowd stirred with courage, the final clash had yet to erupt. The fire might have betrayed him, but the night demanded blood before it would release its hold. The fire coiled tighter around the cloaked man, smoke hissing like serpents, but he fought against it, clawing toward the princess as if dragging his shadow with him. "She is the curse!" he shrieked, his voice cracking, his mask half torn away. "Blind yourselves or be destroyed!" But no one turned away this time. The old man who had thrown his stick raised his voice again, shouting, "Look at her!" And the cry caught like a spark through the crowd. One by one, villagers who had been bowed by fear lifted their heads, their eyes fixed not on the smoke, but on her. The soldiers faltered, their circle breaking. For they too could not look at her and still believe she was a monster. The princess reached up slowly, her hand trembling but steady with resolve, and pulled the veil from her face. The square hushed. She was not a curse, not a shadow, but a woman with eyes so full of sorrow and courage that no fire could conceal it. Tears ran down her cheeks, shining against the green blaze, and in that moment the crowd saw not fear, but truth. She had been hidden away to keep her power of love from undoing the lies of men. The cloaked man lunged, desperate to cover her again, but the soldier who had dropped his sword moved first, slamming him to the ground. The vial fell from his hands and shattered in the fire. The smoke shrieked as though alive, curling into nothing, burning itself out. Silence followed, broken only by the ragged breathing of those who had stood frozen too long. Slowly, the villagers knelt, not in fear, but in reverence, their heads bowed toward her as one. The soldier pressed his fist to his chest, pledging his loyalty, and others followed. The cloaked man struggled once more, spitting curses, but his own fire consumed his cloak, and he was dragged away, powerless, his voice lost to ash. The princess lowered her gaze, her veil still clutched in her hand, then turned to me. I had obeyed the rule for days, never daring to lift my eyes, but now she whispered, "Look at me." And I did. She was scarred, yes, her beauty marred by the cruelty of secrecy and years in the dark, but none of it mattered. What shone was not perfection, but the grace of being seen as she was. The villagers watched as she placed her hand over mine, the blue silk scarf between us. "No one was allowed to look at me," she said softly, her voice carrying through the hushed night. "But you did. And you stayed." I bowed my head, not in fear but in promise, knowing that in this moment I was not her servant, not her purchase, but her choice. And the people rose with us, free at last. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had been told never to look at her, would you have obeyed or dared to see her face? Tell us in the comments.